That bike belongs to my father, and my father has been waiting 15 years for someone to come back for it. The coffee pot hit the floor. Nobody moved. 11 bikers, one girl, a snowstorm outside pressing hard against the glass, and a single sentence that just cracked the room open like a fault line splitting under pressure. The biggest man at the table, Silverbeard's 61 years old hands that had gripped handlebars longer than this girl had been alive, slowly set down his cup. His voice when it came was barely above a whisper. "What is your father's name?" She didn't flinch. "Nathan Harper." The glass slipped from his hand. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with me until the very end. You will not regret it. The snowstorm came in fast that Tuesday night, the kind that didn't announce itself, didn't give warning, just dropped without mercy on everything below it and dared the world to keep moving. Highway 9 through the Appalachian corridor had already eaten 2 delivery trucks and a family sedan by the time the Iron Wolves MC rolled through the pass in formation. 11 bikes, 11 men, all of them too old to be doing this in February, and not a single one of them willing to admit it. Victor Malone Road name grave earned not from death, but from the way he buried conversations he was done having. Road Point, 61 years old, silver beard down to his sternum, hands that had gripped handlebars so long his fingers didn't fully straighten anymore. He felt the storm in his knuckles before he saw it in the sky, and that was the only reason 11 men were alive that night, instead of scattered across black ice on a mountain curve. "Diner, 2 miles, we're pulling in," he said into the CB clip to his collar. Nobody argued. Victor Malone had been road captain of the Iron Wolves for 22 years. When he said pull in, you pulled in. Not because they were afraid of him, because in 2 decades the man had been wrong exactly twice, and one of those times had still somehow worked out. The diner was called Patty's. Hand-painted sign above the door, one letter already fallen off, so it read, "Pat Yays" in uneven red on a whiteboard. The parking lot was gravel and ice. The neon in the window buzzed in the cold, but there was light inside and heat, and that was enough. They came through the door in a single file, not because anyone told them to, but because 11 big men in road leather walking into a rural mountain diner all at once tended to give people heart attacks. And that wasn't the goal tonight. The goal tonight was coffee, shelter, maybe pie if God was feeling generous. The diner was quiet, 3 booths occupied, a couple in the corner who stopped talking the moment the door opened, an old trucker at the counter who looked up once and went back to his soup like men like these were background noise to him, which after 40 years on the road they probably were, and a teenage kid in a booth by himself staring at a phone completely oblivious to the entire universe outside his screen. Normal, tired, small town Tuesday night, normal. They took the long row of tables by the window, pushing 2 together, pulling chairs from a third. Helmets went on the table. Gloves came off. The heat hit them all like a wall, and someone Eddie Rack, youngest of the group at 44, let out a sound that was embarrassingly close to a moan. "Don't," said the man beside him. "I'm just saying it's warm, Des." "I know what you were saying. Then let me have this." Desmond Des Carter, former Marine, currently the Iron Wolves head of chapter operations, and the only man Victor trusted to count money without skimming, shook his head and reached for a menu. "You grew up in Minnesota, and you're moaning over 55 degrees. I grew up in Minnesota, that's why I'm moaning." Laughter moved down the table. Quiet laughter. The kind men laugh when they're tired and cold and grateful and don't want to admit to any of those things too loudly. That was when Lily Harper came out of the kitchen. She was 23, small, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had lost the fight against a long shift. She wore a green apron over a flannel shirt, and she carried a coffee tray with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this since she was tall enough to reach the counter, which in this diner had probably been age 12. Her name tag said Lily in letters she'd written herself, slightly crooked, slightly too large. She moved down the row of them without flinching. That was the first thing Victor noticed. Some waitresses in small towns went rigid when a group like them walked in, hands tight on, eyes down the whole body, radiating a single clear message that said, "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lily Harper didn't do that. She moved the same way she probably moved for the trucker and the couple in the corner. Present, steady, professional in the way that only comes from having genuinely nothing left to prove. "Coffee all around," she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Victor said. "Anything else to start?" "Whatever's hot." She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. "I'll bring out the soup. It's chicken and wild rice tonight, made fresh about an hour ago." "That'll do." She went down the line filling cups, and Victor watched her the way he watched most people. Not with suspicion, just with the quiet, constant attention of a man who'd spent his whole life reading rooms before entering them. She was tired. Not just tonight tired. She was the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and doesn't go away with sleep. He recognized it because he'd seen it in the mirror for 15 years. He looked away, picked up his coffee, let the warmth move through the ceramic into his palms, and felt some knot in his shoulders begin to loosen. Outside, the snow came down harder. He thought we might be here a while. He didn't know yet how right he was, or how wrong he was about what a while was going to mean. Or the soup came, the bread came, the second pot of coffee came. The couple in the corner paid and left. The trucker finished his bowl, left $3 on the counter, and disappeared into the storm without looking back. The teenager stayed still, locked in his phone thumb, scrolling in the rhythm of a person who has nowhere else to be. The iron wolves settled in. Road talk, route talk. The easy circular conversation of men who had been riding together so long they sometimes finished each other's sentences without realizing it. Who was having knee trouble? Whether the pass on Route 31 was worth the view anymore, or if the construction had killed it. Whether Eddie was ever going to fix the rattle in his exhaust, or just keep pretending he didn't hear it. "I hear it," Eddie said. "I just don't care." "The rattle or the truth?" Des asked. "Pick one." "Normal, quiet, the kind of night you didn't remember because nothing happened and that was fine, and sometimes fine was everything you needed." Lily came back to refill the cups at the far end of the table. She moved around Victor toward the window, toward the glass, and that was when it happened. She stopped. Not slowed, not hesitated. Stopped the way a person stops when their brain overrides their body and says, "No, wait, look again." The coffee pot hung in her hand at an angle. Not pouring, not moving. Her eyes were fixed on the parking lot outside. On the row of bikes standing in the snow, dark shapes in the white. 11 of them leaning on their kickstands, covered now in a thin layer of accumulation. Her face did something complicated, something Victor couldn't immediately name. And then she said it, quietly, almost to herself. But in a quiet diner with 11 men who'd spent their lives learning how to listen, it carried like a shout. "That bike looks exactly like my dad's." The table went still. Not silent, the heat still hummed, the snow still hit the glass. The teenager in the corner was still somewhere inside his phone, but the particular sound of 11 men existing in a space together just stopped. Victor set his cup down, slowly. "Which one?" he asked. She turned, seemed to realize for the first time that she had said it out loud. A flicker of something moved across her face, embarrassment maybe, or the reflex of a woman who'd learned to keep her interior life out of public view. "The black one," she said, "third from the left, with the eagle on the tank." The table went even stiller because there was only one bike in the Iron Wolves MC with a hand-welded eagle on the tank, and it hadn't belonged to any of them for 15 years. Victor stood up. He was not a man who moved quickly. Everything he did with the deliberate weight of someone who understood that urgency and panic were not the same thing, and that panic had never once solved anything. He walked to the window, looked out at the row of bikes, looked at the third one from the left. He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned back to her, and his voice when it came was lower than before, more careful. "What did you just say about your father?" "Anything." Lily Harper had lived with a locked-up past for so long that she'd gotten good at not talking about it. You learned how to do that growing up the way she had. When your father was a ghost and your mother was a memory, and the only thing people in town knew about your family was the wrong things you learned to keep your story close. To answer questions with short answers, to smile and move on. She hadn't meant to say it. It just came out of her like something that had been waiting at the back of her throat without her permission. Now 11 bikers were looking at her. She stood her ground, because she was Lily Harper, and standing her ground was the one skill nobody had ever had to teach her. "His name is Nathan Harper," she said. He used to ride a long time ago. She paused. He made that eagle himself, in our garage. I was 4. I remember watching him do it. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the first one. This one had weight. Victor Malone looked at her for 3 full seconds. His face, which normally carried the expression of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by anything, was doing something she couldn't read at all. Then he said, "Nathan Harper." Not a question, a recognition. And the way he said it, slow, precise, like a man handling something breakable, told her everything and nothing at the same time. "You know him," she said. Another beat. Victor glanced down the table. Some look passing between him and Des that was fast and private and too old to translate. Then back to her. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "I know you are." His voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't a demand. It was the voice of a man who had something to say that required the other person to not be standing. "Please, Bordeaux." She looked at him for a moment, calculated the room waitress instinct threat assessment, the quiet arithmetic of a woman alone in a diner with a table full of strangers. And then something in his face, some specific quality of weight in old sorrow told her this wasn't danger. This was something else. She pulled a chair from the empty table behind her and sat on the edge of it, coffee pot still in her hand. "When did you last see your father?" Victor asked. "Last weekend," she said. "I bring him groceries on Sundays." Victor absorbed that. "He's in town." "He never left. We live 10 minutes from here." Her chin came up just slightly. "He lives alone. He's been alone since my mom died. That was 9 years ago." Victor's jaw moved once, like he'd swallowed something with a sharp edge. From down the table, Des said quietly, "Victor, I know." "Victor, I know, Des." Lily looked between them. "What do you know, Anna?" The next 20 minutes dismantled everything Lily Harper thought she understood about her father's past. She had known the broad shape of it. Nathan Harper had ridden with a club when he was young. He'd done time federal 6 years, and he'd come home to a wife who was already sick and a daughter who was learning to read, and a life that had been on hold so long it had stopped resembling a life at all. She knew that. She had always known that. What she had not known, what she had never been told, not once, not in any form, was why he went to prison. Victor Malone told her not all of it, not the specific charges, not the names that were involved, or the exact shape of the operation that federal prosecutors had spent 3 years trying to crack. But the essential truth of it, the core of it, that truth he put on the table in front of her, like something he was ashamed to be touching. Nathan Harper had not gone to prison for something he did. He had gone to prison for something he said. When federal investigators had come to the Iron Wolves with informant testimony and enough circumstantial evidence to put away between 8 and 12 members, including 2 men with children and 1 man already on his 3rd strike, who would have died behind bars, Nathan Harper had stood in front of a federal prosecutor and told them that the responsibility was his, that the decisions were his, that the others had followed his direction. None of it was true. All of it was convincing. And Nathan Harper, who had been the best liar in the Iron Wolves since he was 19 years old, had committed to it so completely, so absolutely, that the case closed around him like a trap he'd built himself. 6 years. He served every day of it. The others, the ones he'd covered, the ones whose names had disappeared from the prosecutor's documents, because Nathan Harper had made himself the only story worth telling, had kept writing, had kept living, and had never visited, not once, not a letter, not a call, nothing. Lily sat very still through all of this. When Victor finished, she didn't say anything right away. She was the kind of woman who processed before she spoke, who let things land fully before she responded to them. And Victor watched her work through it in real time, watched the information settle into her like weight being added to a scale. Then quiet and precise. "He did 6 years for you." "Yes." "To keep your people out of prison." "Yes." "And you never came back." Victor's hands were flat on the table. He didn't look away from her. "No, not once, no." Another silence, this one long enough that the snow outside seemed to get louder. "He never told me," she said finally. "He wouldn't. My mother never told me either." She probably didn't know the whole of it either. Nathan wasn't the kind of man who made a point of the things he carried. Lily looked down at the coffee pot in her hands. She looked at it for a moment, like she'd forgotten what it was. Then she said carefully, "You said it's Nathan's bike out there." "Yes." How did you get it? Victor's voice shifted, settled lower. He left it with the club when they took him in, said he didn't want it sitting in impound, said, and I remember the exact words because I was standing right there when he said them. He said, keep it running, I'll be back for it. She absorbed that. We kept it running, Victor said. Every one of these years, that bike has been maintained, detailed, kept up, by different men in the club at different times, but always running. He paused. It's the only thing we did right. The words hit the room without drama, just landed plain and flat and terrible. Lily set the coffee pot on the nearest table. She pressed both hands flat to her thighs. He's not okay, she said. My dad, he hasn't been okay for a long time. I know. He barely leaves the house. He doesn't talk to people. He's got this look in his eyes like he's watching everything through glass, like he's on the other side of something and he doesn't know how to get back. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. I thought it was the grief, my mom. I thought that's all it was. It's not all it was. No, she said. I can see that now. She looked at Victor. The look was not hostile. It was clear and direct and very, very tired. He has been waiting for you for 15 years. He has been waiting for someone to come back and nobody did. And eventually he stopped waiting and he stopped expecting anything. And that's when the light went out. Victor Malone had been called many things in his life, most of them accurate, most of them earned. He had not in 22 years of road captaining ever sat in a room and felt something that could only be described as shame the way he felt it right now. Not the managed, rationalized shame of a man who tells himself the story of why things happened the way they did, but the real thing. The kind that doesn't negotiate. We need to see him, he said. He won't want to see you. I know. He will not be glad you're there. I know that too. She looked at him one more time, reading him. Whatever she found there, whatever passed through her quiet, careful assessment of the man across from her, seemed to settle something. Give me 20 minutes, she said. I'll call someone to cover the rest of my shift. She stood up, picked the coffee pot back up, started toward the kitchen. Then she stopped at the door, her back to the room, her voice low enough that only the table could hear it. He still talks about the rides. At night, sometimes when he doesn't know I can hear him. He talks about the mountains and the open road and the way the world looks from a bike at sunrise. He has been talking about it for 15 years to an empty house. She pushed through the kitchen door. The table was silent. Outside, the snow kept coming down. 11 bikes stood in the lot, covered now anonymous cold. And on the third one from the left, barely visible under the white, a hand-welded eagle waited. The same as the day it was made. The same as the day the man who made it was taken away. Victor looked at Des across the table. Des said nothing. He didn't have to. Victor reached for his coffee cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. We're riding tonight, he said. Not one man at the table argued. The drive to Nathan Harper's house took 11 minutes. Lily led them in her truck, a dented gray pickup that had more rust on the wheel wells than paint, and the Iron Wolves followed in formation behind her through streets that had gone completely white and completely silent. Nobody spoke on the CB. Nobody needed to. Whatever was waiting at the end of this drive, it didn't need commentary. It needed men who could hold the weight of what they'd done without dropping it on the floor the moment it got heavy. Victor rode in the quiet of his own head and thought about 15 years. He thought about the specific day Nathan Harper was sentenced. The courtroom. The way Nathan had stood at the defendant's table without shaking, without looking at the men seated in the gallery behind him. The men he was saving as if seeing their faces would make the whole thing harder to carry. He had looked straight ahead, straight at the judge. And when the sentence came down, 6-year federal, no parole consideration for the first 3, Nathan had nodded once like a man receiving a bill he'd already decided he was going to pay. Victor had told himself, standing in that gallery, that he would visit, that the club would visit, that 6 years was a long time, but it wasn't forever. And when Nathan came out the other side, there would be something waiting for him worth coming back to. He had told himself that every month for about 4 months. And then life had moved, the way life moved when you let it, when you gave it permission to carry you forward, instead of holding your ground against it. And the visits that were going to happen became visits that hadn't happened yet, and then became visits that were getting harder to schedule, and then became a silence so long and so solid that breaking it started to feel like something that would require more courage than any of them had sitting around at any given moment. 15 years. The truck slowed, stopped. Victor stopped behind it. The house was at the end of a lane that had probably been gravel once and was now just two parallel ruts in frozen mud, bordered by overgrown brush. The house itself was a single story with a covered porch that leaned slightly to the left, like a man favoring an old injury. Two windows in the front, both dark. Lily was already out of the truck, moving toward the porch. Victor put his kickstand down and stood there for a moment. Behind him, one by one, the others did the same. 11 engines going quiet in succession like a sentence losing its words. Des came up beside him. "You want me to come in?" Des asked. "Not at first." "You sure? Because walking in alone after 15 years of nothing seems like a specific kind of stupid." "Noted. I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying, Des. Wait out here. If something breaks open, I'll come get you." Des made the sound he always made when he thought Victor was wrong, but wasn't going to push it further. A short exhale through the nose, barely audible, the conversational equivalent of, "I'm logging this." Then he stepped back. Victor followed Lily to the porch. She knocked on the door, not her own knock, not the easy, familiar knock of a daughter who knew the sound of her own family's door. A careful knock, like she understood that tonight was different, like she was announcing something she hadn't fully prepared him for and was bracing herself for the shockwave. Silence from inside. She knocked again. "Dad, it's me. Open up." A long pause. The kind of pause that wasn't absence, it was consideration. Someone on the other side deciding whether to answer. Then the sound of a deadbolt. The door opened 6 inches. A chain still on it. One eye looking out through the gap, pale blue bloodshot at the edges, set in a face that Victor could only see a sliver of, but that hit him like a full collision anyway. Nathan Harper looked at his daughter. "Lily, it's late." "I know. I need you to open the door." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Open the door." "You drove out in the snow to tell me nothing's wrong." "Dad." A beat. Nathan's eye moved slightly, caught something in the peripheral dark of the porch, caught Victor standing there 3 feet behind Lily Collar up against the cold, saying nothing. The eye went very still. Then the chain came off. The door opened all the way, and Nathan Harper stood in his own doorway and looked at Victor Malone for the first time in 15 years. He was 58 years old. He had been broad, once the kind of man who took up space by nature, not intention, the way a person does when their body remembers a version of itself that knew physical work. That broadness was still there in his frame, but it sat differently now, carried differently, like a house where the furniture hadn't moved but the walls had shifted slightly in every direction. His hair was gray. His face was lined in the specific way that came from years of indoor living and not from sun. He wore a flannel shirt unbuttoned over a white undershirt and sweatpants, and he was holding a mug of something that had gone cold. He looked at Victor. Victor looked at him. Neither of them said anything for 5 full seconds. Then Nathan said very quietly, with absolutely no inflection at all, "You have got to be kidding me." And then he turned around and walked back into the house, leaving the door open behind him, which Victor understood correctly to mean, "Come in, but don't think for 1 second that this means I'm glad you're here." Victor followed him in. Lily followed behind Victor, pulling the door shut. The inside of the house smelled like coffee and old paper, and something that Victor's brain cataloged without his permission as loneliness. Not dramatic loneliness, not the kind that announces itself, but the flat accumulated loneliness of a space that had forgotten what it was like to hold more than one person's daily sound. Nathan sat down in a chair that was clearly his chair, worn to his specific shape, positioned at a specific angle to the lamp, a small table beside it with a book face down, and a coaster and the cold mug. He sat in it the way a man sat in the only comfortable thing left in his life. He did not offer them a seat. Victor took one anyway on the couch across from him. Lily sat on the arm of the couch close to her father's sight line and watched them both. Nathan looked at Victor. "How did you find me?" "Your daughter found us." A pause. Nathan's eyes moved to Lily. Something moved through them, not in anger, not exactly. Something more like the look a person got when they realized they'd left a door unlocked that they'd specifically meant to keep shut. "Lily, Dad, what did you do?" "I recognized the bike." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have done that." "Maybe not, but I did." He held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at Victor. His face had settled into something flat and controlled, the kind of expression that took years to build, the kind that said everything was behind it and none of it was coming out without a fight. "So," Nathan said, 15 years, and you're here because my daughter flagged you down at a diner." "Yes, not because you decided to come." The word landed the way Nathan meant it to land. Victor didn't flinch. "No, not because we decided to come. You're right. We should have come a long time ago and we didn't. I'm not going to sit here and hand you a list of reasons that add up to an excuse. They don't." Nathan looked at him, a long reading look. "That's it. That's the whole speech. That's the beginning of it. There's more. There's more. Then I'll tell you right now, Victor, if the rest of it is about how the years got away from everyone and life got complicated and you thought about reaching out and somehow never managed to, I've already told that story to myself about 1,000 times and I know every single word of it and I don't need to hear your version." His voice was not raised. That was the thing about Nathan Harper that had always unsettled the people who expected a man like him to come in loud. He had never been loud. He was the kind of man who lowered his volume when he was most serious so that the people around him had to lean in, had to give him their full attention just to hear him. And by the time they'd closed the distance, they were already inside whatever he was saying. "I know," Victor said. "You don't get to just show up. I know that too. I did 6 years. Nathan set the mug down on the table beside him, set it down with a care that was itself a kind of tension, the care of a man keeping his hands busy so they didn't do something else. 6 years, Victor. I sat in a federal facility, and I told myself the whole time that when I got out, there would be something on the other side worth the price, that the people I paid the price for would still be there. I told myself that for 6 years. His voice was still even, still controlled. And then I got out, and Margaret was in the hospital. The name hit the room like a stone dropping into still water. Victor went very still. "She'd been diagnosed 14 months before my release," Nathan said. "Ovarian cancer, stage 3 when they found it. She didn't tell me. She said she didn't want me worrying about something I couldn't do anything about from inside a cell, and I didn't know whether to be grateful for that or furious, and in the end, it didn't matter because by the time I got home, she had 4 months left, and we spent all of them trying to pretend we had more." Lily's hands were folded in her lap. She had heard some of this, not all of it. Victor could see the difference in her, the parts where her expression held steady because she already knew, and the parts where it shifted because she was learning something new in real time. "The club knew she was sick," Nathan said. "I know they knew because Margaret told me she'd sent word through Styx. You remember Styx." "I remember Styx. So the club knew my wife was dying and I was coming home to it alone, and not one of you—" He stopped. The word just cut off clean like a man closing a door before the rest of the sentence could get through it. He looked at his mug. "Not one of you." The silence in the room was complete. Victor sat inside it and didn't reach for words to fill it because there were no words that belonged there. The silence was Nathan's. It had been his for 15 years, and it was his to hold as long as he needed. Then Nathan looked up. "What do you want, Victor? What is it that you actually want here? Because I'm 62 years old. I know that's not what I look like, but that's what I am on paper, and I'm tired, and I live alone, and I have figured out how to get through most days without thinking about any of this. And then my daughter brings 11 bikers to my door at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night in a snowstorm, and I want to know what the point of that is." Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked at Nathan the way he'd been looking at him since they walked in straight on no deflection. "I want to start over," Victor said. "I want to do it different. I want to give back what we took from you when we disappeared, and I understand that might not be possible, but I'm going to try anyway because doing nothing for 15 more years is not something I'm willing to carry." Nathan stared at him. "That bike outside," Victor said. "We kept it running. Every year. Every single year, someone in the club maintained that bike because you said you'd come back for it, and none of us were willing to say out loud that you wouldn't. Because saying that out loud would have meant saying something else out loud that none of us were ready to say." Nathan said nothing. "That bike belongs to you," Victor said. "It's always belonged to you. We drove it here tonight. It's in your driveway." The room held. Something moved across Nathan Harper's face. Something complicated and old, and very close to the surface, the kind of thing a man spent years learning to keep below the waterline. His jaw moved once. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to both of them, looking out at the dark and the snow and whatever was visible of the driveway, and Victor watched the set of his shoulders and didn't say a word. Lily looked at Victor. Victor shook his head slightly. Wait. They waited. Nathan's voice, when it came, was not the controlled voice from before. It was quieter, rougher, like something had loosened in it without his permission. You kept it running. Yes. 15 years. Yes. A pause. That's the most Iron Wolves thing I've ever heard, Nathan said. Too stubborn to come see me. Too stubborn to let the bike go. It wasn't laughter. It was too tired for laughter. But it was something. Something that had not been in the room 5 minutes ago. Victor exhaled slowly. Nathan, there are 10 more of us outside in your driveway right now. They're not coming in unless you say so. But they're there because they wanted to be there. Nobody forced anybody. Every man who rode tonight rode because he wanted to stand in front of you and look you in the eye. He paused. Let me bring them in. Nathan didn't turn around. Lily said softly, Dad. A long silence. It's cold, Nathan said finally. They can come in. That was all. But it was enough. Victor walked to the front door, opened it, stepped out onto the porch and looked at the 11 men standing in his driveway and said nothing, just made a motion with his hand. Come in. They came. Not all at once, not in a rush, one at a time. The way men entered a room they weren't sure they deserved to be in yet. Heads slightly lowered, road leather, and road years, and road silence, filing through a front door that Nathan Harper had just unlocked for the first time in a very long time. Des came in last. He stopped just inside the door, looked at Nathan Harper standing by the window, and said exactly what Victor knew he would say, because Des had never once in his life wasted a word on something that didn't need saying. I should have come back sooner. Nathan turned and looked at him. Des met his eyes. I'm not going to explain it or wrap it up in anything. I should have come back. I didn't. That's on me. Nathan looked at him for a moment. Then, you look terrible, Des. I know. What happened to your hair? Life. Same thing happened to mine. Des let out a breath. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. The temperature in the room shifted by something unquantifiable but real. The way a room shifted when the worst thing had been said and the people in it were still standing. Someone, Eddie Rack, who had terrible timing and somehow always said the right thing anyway, spoke up from near the back of the group. Is there any coffee? Nathan stared at him. I'm asking, Eddie said, because it's cold and we rode a long way, and I noticed you had a mug already, so it seemed like the infrastructure was there. A beat. Kitchen, Nathan said. Thank you. Don't touch anything except the coffee. Understood. And Eddie Rack walked into the kitchen of a man he hadn't seen in 15 years, as if he walked through that kitchen every Tuesday, and the sound of the cabinet opening and the coffee maker running and the completely ordinary noise of a person making a familiar drink in an unfamiliar space filled the house like something that had been missing from it for a very long time. Nathan watched the door to the kitchen, then he sat back down in his chair. Victor sat back down on the couch. The others found walls to lean on, chairs to borrow from the kitchen table corners to stand in quietly. 11 men in a small house that had held only one for 9 years, and somehow the house didn't crack. Somehow it held. Lily looked at her father. He was looking at the floor. Not at any of them, at the floor. His hands were open on his knees, not clenched. Not held, just open, and he was breathing with the deliberate rhythm of a man who was keeping himself very carefully inside the boundary of what he could handle. She reached over and put her hand on his. He looked at her hand, then at her face. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either, but he turned his hand over slowly and held hers. And Victor Malone, who had not cried at anything in 22 years of road captaining, looked down at his own boots and kept very quiet until the moment passed. From the kitchen, the smell of coffee moved through the house. Outside, the snow was still coming down. But inside Nathan Harper's house, for the first time in 15 years, the number of people present exceeded 1. And that for tonight was the whole of everything. The coffee helped, not much but enough to matter. There was something about a room full of people holding warm cups that lowered the temperature of a conversation. Not the air temperature, which was still adjusting to 11 extra bodies and a furnace that hadn't been asked to work this hard in years, but the interior temperature. The thing that determined whether people spoke or just stood near each other waiting for the ground to shift. Nathan held his refilled mug and sat in his chair, and the men of the Iron Wolves arranged themselves around his living room, and for a while nobody said anything of consequence. Eddie asked whether the coffee maker had always been that loud, or whether something was wrong with it. A man named Cord, who had ridden with the club for 16 years and still looked like someone who'd never been anywhere near a motorcycle because he was built like a high school math teacher, asked Nathan whether he'd insulated the crawl space because the floor was cold, and that was a sure sign of heat loss. Nathan told him the crawl space had been insulated in 2019 and the floor was cold because the house was old, and if Cord wanted to fix it, he was welcome to come back on a weekend with the right materials. Cord said he might take him up on that. Nathan said nothing, but he didn't say no. Lily watched all of this from the kitchen doorway. She was learning something about her father in real time, something she hadn't been able to see from inside the specific relationship of daughter to parent, where everything got filtered through love and fear and years of shared history. She was learning that Nathan Harper, in a room full of men who had known him long before she existed, was a different gravity. Not a different person, the same person, but pulling things toward him differently. Like a word that meant one thing in one sentence and something richer in another. These men had ridden with him, had eaten with him and slept on the same ground, and shared the specific vocabulary of a life built on the road. And now they were in his house, and the air between them was old and complicated, and still under all of it, familiar. The way the air was between people who had once known each other at the level of complete trust and then lost that and were now trying to locate it again in the dark. She thought, this is going to break before it heals. She was right. It started with a question from Des, a simple question, the kind that seemed safe until it wasn't. Are you still riding at all? Nathan looked at him. What do you think? I'm asking because I don't know. No, Nathan said, I'm not riding. When did you stop? When did I stop? Nathan repeated it back without the inflection of a question, like he was looking at the words from a distance. Margaret's last year. I stopped. It didn't seem right. She couldn't get out of the house and I was going to go ride felt wrong. That was 9 years ago, Des said. I know when it was. Nathan, I know when it was Des. I don't need you to do the math. A pause, then Des said, careful as a man crossing ice. That's a long time to stay stopped. The room was paying attention. Not visibly, nobody turned their heads or shifted dramatically, but the quality of the stillness changed. The way attention changed the air in a room. Nathan looked at his mug. Yeah, well, some things you start and then you can't figure out how to start them again. The bike's outside, Victor said. Your bike. I heard you the first time. It runs. I'm telling you because I want you to know it runs. Victor, Nathan's voice was flat. I am not going to walk outside and get on a motorcycle at 10:30 at night in a snowstorm because you showed up and think a dramatic gesture is going to. I'm not asking you to do that. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to know it's there. That's all I'm asking right now. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, out the window, at nothing. I had a dream last month, he said, and then stopped. No one said anything. He continued slowly, like a man pulling something out of the ground that had been buried long enough to have roots. I dreamed I was on the road, one of the old routes, the one through Cherokee County that takes about 4 hours and comes out on the high side of the valley just before the sun sets. You remember that road, Victor? I remember it. In the dream, I was on that road and the light was exactly right, the way it got in October, that specific October light, and I wasn't tired. I wasn't carrying anything. I was just on the road. He paused. I woke up and I was in this chair. I'd fallen asleep in this chair again the way I do, and the house was dark, and I woke up out of that dream, and it took me about 30 seconds to figure out where I was. His voice was still even, still controlled. That was a bad 30 seconds. The room held him in it. Lily pressed her shoulder blades against the door frame behind her and breathed through her nose. I used to have that dream a lot, Nathan said. I had it in prison. I had it after I got out. I had it the whole time Margaret was sick, and I couldn't do anything except be there and watch and hold her hand and say things that didn't fix anything. I had it after. He looked at his hands. And then for a while, I stopped having it. And I thought, okay, maybe that's done. Maybe that part is closed and I'm past it. His jaw moved. And then last month, I had it again. Victor said very quietly, "What do you think that means?" Nathan looked at him. "I think it means I'm not past it," Nathan said. "I think it means there's something in me that hasn't given up on a version of my life that I don't know how to get back to. And I don't know whether that's hope or just suffering with a better packaging." The silence after that was the kind of silence that happened when something true had been said by someone who hadn't meant to say it, and everyone in the room understood what it had cost. And then Nathan Harper looked around his living room. At the men arranged in it, men he had ridden with, fought with, trusted, with things that couldn't be untrusted, and then lost to the long, slow erosion of absence, and something shifted in his face. Not softness, not forgiveness. Something harder than both of those things. Something that had been waiting a long time to come out and had finally decided tonight was the night. "I want to say something," he said. Victor said, "Say it." "I want to say it to the room, not just you." "Then say it to the room." Nathan set his mug down, both hands on his knees, and he looked at them, all of them, one face at a time, moving around the room, and when he spoke, his voice had lost the flatness. What was underneath it had finally surfaced. "I don't blame any of you for the prison," he said. "I want to be clear on that. I made that choice. Nobody put a gun to my head. I looked at the situation, I looked at the men involved, and I made a decision that I believed was right, and I would probably make the same decision again, even knowing what it cost me, because that is who I am, and I have never been able to be anyone different." He stopped, took a breath. "But I want you to understand something." His voice dropped lower, not softer, lower. "I had a daughter who was 88 years old when I went in. 8 years old. She didn't understand where her father was. She knew the word prison, but she didn't understand what it meant, and Margaret spent 6 years feeding her a version of the story that was gentle enough for a child to carry. And I missed everything. I missed 6 years of her. I missed the things she became while I was gone, the specific version of Lily Harper that existed between ages 8 and 14, and I will never get that back." Lily in the doorway stopped breathing. "I missed Margaret's diagnosis," Nathan said. "I missed the first year of it, when the doctors were still saying there was something to fight, when there were still options on the table, and decisions to make and fear to go through together. I missed all of it. And I came home with 4 months left, and I tried, God. I tried, but you cannot compress 6 years of presence into 4 months. You just can't. It doesn't compress." He stopped again. His hands on his knees were not steady anymore. "And I want to ask you something," he said, "all of you. I want to ask you to think about where you were during those 6 years. Where you were when Margaret sent word through Styx that she was sick. Where you were when I was counting days in a federal facility. I want you to sit in this room in my house and actually think about it. Not give me an answer, just think about it." Nobody spoke. The furnace ran. The snow hit the windows. 11 men sat inside the question Nathan Harper had just handed them like a weight, with no comfortable way to hold it. Victor was the one who finally moved. He stood up from the couch, not fast, not dramatically, and he walked to where Nathan was sitting, and he crouched down in front of him, eye level, the way you did when you wanted someone to understand that you weren't going to look away. "You're right," Victor said. "Everything you just said is right, all of it. And I can't fix it. I can't give back what you lost, and I can't undo the years. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I'm going to make it right, because some things don't get made right, they just get carried differently." He held Nathan's gaze. "But I am able to tell you this. I am not leaving. I came here tonight because your daughter recognized a bike in a diner, and it was the thing that finally made me do what I should have done a decade ago. And I know that's a terrible reason for the timing. I know it's too late to be the reason it should have been, but I'm here, right now, in your living room. And I am asking you, Nathan, to let that mean something." Nathan looked at him. For a long moment, his face did what his face had been doing all night, holding, controlling, managing. And then something in it gave way, not catastrophically, not with drama, just gave. The way a door gives when you have been leaning on it long enough and it finally decides to open. "You kept the bike running," and Nathan said, "every year. Who did the maintenance? Rotated. Different guys. Cord did the last 2 years." Nathan looked over at Cord, who was still leaning against the far wall, arms folded, looking at the floor. Cord looked up, met his eyes. I don't know bikes, Cord said. I watched videos. Nathan stared at him. You watched videos. YouTube. There are a lot of very good tutorials. I did not damage it. I want to be clear about that. You watched YouTube videos to maintain a motorcycle you'd never touched before. For 2 years, Cord said. Yes. Something happened on Nathan Harper's face that hadn't happened in that house in a very long time. He laughed, not a big laugh, not the full-body laugh of a man who still had that in him easily. It was rusty and brief and came out of him like something that surprised him on the way, but it was real, completely real. The realest sound that had been made in that room all night, and the men around him carefully, quietly let themselves breathe again. Lily put her hand over her mouth. Victor stayed crouched in front of Nathan and let the moment exist without touching it. Nathan shook his head. YouTube. He looked at the ceiling, looked back at Cord. Does it run right? It runs perfectly, Cord said with the specific defensive dignity of a man who had taken an insult to his competence. I am an excellent motorcycle maintainer based on the available literature. The available... Nathan stopped. All right. He looked at Victor. All right. The word all right carrying about 40 different meanings in 2 syllables. Victor stood up slowly, his knees popped, and he didn't comment on it because he was too old to be embarrassed by that anymore. He went back to the couch. The room exhaled, and then Nathan said something that nobody saw coming. Not Victor, not Lily, not any of the 11 men who had just survived the most emotionally compressed 45 minutes of their recent lives. He said, I have something to show you. He stood up from his chair slowly with the specific caution of a man whose body had been sedentary long enough to require negotiation, and he walked down the hallway toward the back of the house. Victor looked at Des. Des shrugged. They followed. The hallway was narrow. Photos on one wall. A Lily at various ages, Margaret, in a frame that was slightly larger than the others, and positioned at eye level a few older photos that Victor didn't look at long enough to identify. Nathan stopped at the last door on the left and opened it. The room inside was not a spare bedroom. It was not a storage room. It was a workspace, a proper one with a long table along one wall and tools arranged with the kind of care that only happened when someone was very serious about what they were doing. On the table in various states of completion were parts, leather parts, hand-worked leather cut and tooled and stitched with a precision that made several of the men in the doorway draw breath involuntarily. Saddlebags, tank covers, gloves, a jacket panel half finished on a form. Work that was not hobbyist work. Work that was serious, professional. Victor looked at it. Nathan stood beside the table with his hands in his pockets, watching them look. When did you start doing this? Victor asked. About 8 years ago, Nathan said. I needed something to do with my hands. Margaret it was the last year I needed to be doing something at night instead of just sitting. I'd always been decent with leather. Started small. He shrugged. It turned into something. Turned into something, Des said. He was looking at a finished saddlebag set hanging on the wall. Nathan, this is legitimate work. I know it is. Are you selling this? A pause. Some. I don't need much. Nathan, you could sell a lot. Des stopped, looked at him. Does anyone know you're doing this? Lily knows. I mean, Des gestured at the room. Outside of this house, does anyone in the motorcycle community know that Nathan Harper is making leather work in a back room in Appalachia? No. That needs to change. Nathan looked at him. Why? Because you've been sitting in this house for 9 years making things that people would pay serious money for and doing it for nobody. And that's Nathan, that's a waste. And I say that with respect. Nathan was quiet for a moment. I don't do it for the money, he said. I do it because it's the closest thing to riding that I can manage. It keeps me connected to something. I don't know how to explain that. You don't have to explain it, Victor said. I understand it completely. Nathan looked at him. You've been keeping yourself alive, Victor said. That's what this room is. You built yourself a way to stay connected to the thing that kept you going because the thing itself felt too far away. And you've been doing it alone for 8 years. He looked around the room at the tools, the materials, the careful order of a man who had poured himself into this space with everything he had left. Nathan, you are not as gone as you think you are. Nathan didn't respond to that. But he didn't dispute it either. The silence that followed was different from every other silence that had moved through the house that night. This one wasn't heavy, it wasn't charged. It was the silence of something sitting at a turning point, balanced perfectly between what had been and what might be before the weight finally came down on one side. From the living room, Eddie Rack's voice floated down the hallway. "Is there any food? I'm sorry, I know that's a terrible question. I'm asking anyway." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Then, "There's leftover soup in the refrigerator. Should I heat it up? If you can figure out the stove." "How complicated is the stove?" "It's a stove, Eddie. Some stoves are complicated." "It's not complicated." "Great." A pause. "Should I heat it up for everyone?" Nathan looked at the ceiling. At the specific point on the ceiling that a man looked at when he was deciding whether to laugh or surrender. "Heat it up for everyone," he said. And Lily, who had been standing in the hallway through all of it, listening to the sound of her father's house filling with noise and people and the ordinary, irreplaceable chaos of other human beings, leaned her head back against the wall and let herself cry for exactly 5 seconds. Then she wiped her face, straightened up, and went to help Eddie figure out the stove. They stayed the night. Not because anyone planned it that way. Not because Nathan invited them exactly. It was more that the storm outside made leaving a conversation nobody wanted to have. And the soup ran out around midnight, and somewhere between the second pot of coffee and Victor falling asleep on the couch with his boots still on, it simply became the kind of night that ended with 11 men distributed across a small house like the world's most road-worn sleepover. Cord took the floor near the hallway with a couch cushion under his head and didn't complain. Eddie Rack found a recliner in the corner of the living room and was asleep in it within 4 minutes of sitting down, which was a skill the other men had long since stopped being jealous of and started being awed by. Des sat up until 2 in the morning at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he'd stopped drinking and a look on his face that meant he was doing the kind of internal accounting that didn't resolve cleanly. Lily slept in her old room. Or tried to. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the sound of the house, the particular sound it made now with people in it, the shifted breathing of it, the creak and settle of floors that weren't used to this much weight. And she thought about what it had been before. How quiet, how specific and sealed in its quiet, the way her father's life had become specific and sealed. She thought he laughed tonight. She thought, "I cannot remember the last time I heard that." She didn't sleep until nearly 3. Nathan sat in his chair for a long time after everyone else went quiet. Not sleeping, not reading, just sitting in the dark of his own living room, with men sleeping around him, and the sound of the storm tapering off outside, and his hands open in his lap the way they'd been earlier. Not clenched, a posture of something that was not quite acceptance and not quite surrender, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. At some point before dawn, he got up and walked to the front door and opened it. The cold hit him cleanly. The snow had stopped. What was left was the particular silence of a world that had just been covered in white, that deep, specific quiet that came after a storm, when everything that made noise had been muffled and the air had the quality of a held breath. He stepped out onto the porch. His bike was there. He'd known it was there. He'd been told it was there. But knowing and seeing were 2 different things, and he stood on the porch in the cold in his socks and flannel shirt and looked at it for a long time. It looked the same. That was the part that was hard to absorb. Time had moved on his body and through his house and across everything he'd known and loved, and the bike looked the same. Cord's YouTube tutorial maintenance had kept it honest. The eagle on the tank caught the small light from the porch and held it the way metal held light, flat and true and completely indifferent to the ears. He reached out and put his hand on the tank. The cold of the metal went through his palm immediately. He stood there with his hand on it and didn't think about anything in particular. Just stood there. Just felt the cold. Just let himself be a man standing next to his own motorcycle in the dark after a long time away from it, without making it mean anything more than that. After a while, he went back inside and sat in his chair and fell asleep. That was Tuesday night. By Friday, the Iron Wolves hadn't left. Nobody made a formal announcement about this. Nobody sat Nathan down and said, "We're staying, here's the plan." It happened the way things happened between people who had once known each other very well and were in the process of remembering how incrementally, practically, through the accumulation of small actions, that added up to a presence. Cord came back with materials on Thursday morning. He showed up in a pickup truck he'd borrowed from a man in the next town, and he backed it up to the garage, and he started pulling out insulation bats without making a speech about it. When Nathan came out of the house and asked him what he was doing, Cord said he was fixing the crawlspace heat loss problem because it was going to cost Nathan real money on his utility bills through the winter, and that was just practical. Nathan said, "You're doing it wrong." Cord stopped. "What?" "The vapor barrier goes down first." A pause. "That wasn't in the tutorial." "Then the tutorial was wrong." Cord looked at the materials, looked at Nathan. "Are you going to help me or just critique?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he walked over and picked up the vapor barrier roll. "Move," he said. They worked on the crawl space for 4 hours. Nathan didn't say much. Cord said exactly as much as the job required, which was not very much, because Cord was constitutionally incapable of filling silence with noise just to fill it. By the time they were done, Nathan was covered in dust and insulation fiber and had been on his hands and knees under his own house longer than he'd done any physical work in months, and something in his body had woken up from the effort of it. Some cellular memory of what it felt like to do something with your hands and have it be done. He sat on the back step and breathed. Cord sat beside him. After a while, Cord said, "How long has your back been that bad?" "I didn't say my back was bad." "You've been walking like it is since yesterday." Nathan was quiet. "Few years." "Have you seen anybody about it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because seeing somebody about it would mean admitting it's a problem, and I haven't been interested in doing that." Cord looked at the tree line behind the yard. "That's pretty dumb." "I know. There are things that can help. I know that too." "Then Cord." Nathan turned and looked at him. "I understand you're trying to help. I understand that's what all of you are doing here, and I'm not ungrateful for it. But there's a version of help that feels like being handled, and I need you to understand that I've been handling myself for a long time, and I'm not great at accepting the other kind." Cord took that in, sat with it for a moment. Then, okay, I'm not going to push you. I'm just going to keep showing up, and if you want to talk about the back, we'll talk about it, and if you don't, that's fine too. He stood up, brushed insulation off his jacket. "But I'm going to give you the name of a guy, sports medicine doctor 2 towns over. He does a lot of work with veterans who have chronic pain from old injuries. You don't have to call, just have the name." He wrote it on a receipt from his jacket pocket and put it on the step beside Nathan. Nathan looked at it, didn't pick it up, didn't throw it away either. Inside the house, Victor was on the phone with someone back at the chapter. Lily could hear him from the kitchen. Not the words, just the cadence of it, the particular rhythm of a man who was giving instructions and not taking no for any of them. She poured herself a second coffee and listened to the sound of the house being inhabited and thought about how fast this had become normal feeling and how strange that was. Des came into the kitchen. He had flour on his hands, which was alarming. "What are you doing?" Lily asked. "I'm making biscuits." "You can make biscuits." "My grandmother could make biscuits. I'm attempting to make biscuits. Those are different things." "Does my dad know you're using his kitchen?" "Your dad told me where the baking powder was, so yes." She looked at him. "He told you where the baking powder was." "I asked," he answered. It was a very normal exchange. Des looked at her. "You seem surprised that he answered." "I'm surprised he had baking powder. He has a very well-stocked pantry, actually, for a man who supposedly doesn't cook." Lily thought about that. "He cooks. He just doesn't cook for anyone." Des went quiet for a moment. He turned back to the counter and worked the dough with his hands, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, less casual. "How long has he been like this?" he asked. "The way he is now, not the angry version from Tuesday night. The other version, the one who's been alone so long he doesn't know what to do with people." Lily wrapped both hands around her mug. "Since before Mom died. She was sick for a long time and it changed him watching her. And then when she was gone, he just contracted. That's the only word I have for it. He contracted around the empty space and stayed there." Des nodded slowly. "He eats," Lily said. "He sleeps. He makes the leather work in the back room, and he lets me bring groceries on Sundays. He watches the news. He reads. He goes through the motions of a life. Her voice was even but cost her something to stay that way. But he's not in it. He's running the motions without being inside them. You know what I mean? Yes, Des said. I know exactly what you mean. He said it with a weight that made her look at Omin. You've seen it before, she said. More times than I'd like. Other members, veterans, men who came back from things that cost them everything and then discovered that the world didn't pause while they were gone and didn't have a clear place for them when they got back. He pressed the dough down. Men who got very good at surviving because survival was all that was available and then got stuck there because surviving and living require different muscles, and if you only ever use one set, you lose the other. Lily was quiet. Your dad isn't broken, Des said. I want you to hear that. He's not broken. He's stalled. There's a difference. How do you unstall someone? Des looked over at her. Same way you restart an engine that's been sitting too long. Slowly, carefully, with a lot of patience and the understanding that it might sputter and stall again before it catches. He put the biscuits in the oven. They were better than expected. Nathan ate 3 of them and told Des they were decent, which Des correctly interpreted as excellent. The weekend came. More of the Iron Wolves arrived, not all of them. The chapter had obligations, people had jobs and families, and the logistics of real life that didn't pause for dramatic reunions, but enough. By Saturday afternoon, there were 7 men in Nathan's house, in his garage, and his driveway, and the shape of what was happening had started to become visible in the way that shapes became visible when you step back far enough to see the whole of them. Victor had made calls, the kind of calls that a chapter leader made when he'd decided something and was implementing it rather than discussing it. There was a work crew coming Monday to look at the roof. 2 of Nathan's shingles were compromised, and the next hard rain was going to become an interior problem. There was a financial conversation Victor wanted to have with Nathan that Nathan had not agreed to have yet, but would because Victor was patient about the things that mattered, and this mattered. And there was the matter of the leather work, which Des had photographed without Nathan knowing and sent to 2 people in the custom motorcycle community who had responded with language that was not calm. That particular piece of information was delivered to Nathan on Saturday evening by Des, who sat across from him at the kitchen table with his phone and the photographs in the 2 responses printed out on paper, because he understood that Nathan was the kind of man who needed to hold a thing to believe it. Nathan read the first response, then the second. He put them down. You took photographs of my workshop without asking me, he said. Yes, Des said. That's my private work. It is, and I'm sorry for not asking first, but I'm not sorry for sending them, and I think you know why. Nathan looked at the printed pages. One of the respondents had asked for pricing on a custom saddlebag set. The other had asked whether Nathan Harper was the Nathan Harper who had ridden with the Iron Wolves in the early 2000s, because, if so, he'd heard his leatherwork was something else entirely and wanted to commission a jacket panel. That second one knows my name, Nathan said. Word travels in this community. It always did. I've been out of this community for 15 years. Apparently your reputation didn't leave with you. Nathan looked at the pages for a long time. Then he looked up, not at Des, at the window, at the specific place on the wall that men looked at when they were thinking something they hadn't decided yet whether to say. Then he said it. I had a plan when I got out of prison, before Margaret got sick. I had a plan for what I was going to build. The leather work was part of it. I was going to do custom work on the club, grow it into something real. I had sketches. He paused. I still have the sketches. Des didn't move. I never threw them away, Nathan said. I thought about it. After Margaret. I thought about going through everything and clearing it out the way you did after someone was gone, but I couldn't throw the sketches away. I told myself it was because I might need the paper. A short, humorless exhale. It wasn't because I needed the paper. No, Des said, it wasn't. I kept them because some part of me wasn't finished. I know. That part is it's inconvenient, Nathan said. Having a part of yourself that won't finish being interested in the future when the rest of you has decided the future isn't worth the investment. It keeps showing up. He stopped, looked at his hands. I had the dream again last night. The road, the October light. Des was quiet for a moment. Then Nathan, get the sketches. Nathan looked at him. Not tonight if you don't want to. Tomorrow, next week. But get them out. Let's look at them. Des leaned forward. Let's figure out what the plan was and whether it's still a plan, because I think it is. I think the part of you that kept those sketches has been right about that the whole time. The kitchen was very quiet. From somewhere deeper in the house, they could hear Victor talking, low certain sound of him on his phone again, building something in the way that Victor always built things quietly and thoroughly and ahead of the conversation. From outside came the sound of two of the men in the garage, a torque wrench, the specific knock of a Harley engine being listened to carefully. Nathan Harper sat in his kitchen and held the printed pages with the two messages from men who knew his work and wanted more of it, and he sat with the fact of them, and he sat with the 15 years of not being asked, and the 15 years of asking himself, and the 15 years of answering back with silence, because silence had become his native language. And then he said quietly to the air, and to Des, and to no one and everyone, "The sketches are in the back room, under the table, in a gray folder." Des stood up. "I'll get them," Nathan said. "Give me a minute." He stood slowly, walked down the hallway, came back 2 minutes later with a gray folder that was not gray anymore. It had aged into the color of old paper, had been handled enough over the years that its edges were soft. He set it on the table. He didn't open it immediately. He put his hand on the cover the way he'd put his hand on the motorcycle tank in the dark, and he sat with the cold of it, the reality of it, the fact of this thing that he'd carried through 15 years of a life that hadn't gone the way he planned. Then he opened it. The sketches inside were good. Anyone could see that they were good, not the good of ambition, but the good of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had drawn it out with the precision of someone who intended to actually build what he was drawing. Saddlebag designs, tank covers, a full jacket with panels mapped out in detail, the tooling patterns worked out on paper with an eye for proportion that came from something beyond just practice. Des looked at each page without speaking. Victor appeared in the doorway. He'd heard them come in, had followed the gravity of it without being summoned, and looked at the pages over Des's shoulder, and his face did something that Victor Malone's face did not often do. "Nathan," he said. "Don't," Nathan said. "Don't make it into a speech." "I'm not going to make it into a speech. I'm going to ask you one question." Nathan looked at him. "Why did you stop?" Nathan's answer was immediate, too immediate for it to be anything except the truth he'd been holding for a long time already. "Because I thought it didn't matter to anyone except me. And I thought if it only mattered to me, then me sitting alone in a back room doing it was just..." He stopped. Found the word. "Sad. It seemed sad, and I couldn't decide whether it was brave or pathetic, so I kept doing it quietly where nobody could tell me which one it was." Victor absorbed that. "It's neither," Victor said. "It's neither brave nor pathetic. It's just a man who is extraordinarily good at something, keeping himself alive with the thing he's good at in the only way available to him." He looked at the sketches, and now there are other ways available. Nathan looked at the folder, looked at the pages. Outside, someone revved an engine just once clean and full, and the sound of it moved through the walls of the house and across the kitchen and landed somewhere in Nathan Harper's chest, in the specific place where things landed that had been gone long enough to become an ache you stopped noticing. He noticed it now. He looked at Lily, who was standing in the kitchen doorway again. She'd gotten good at doorways over the course of this week, at finding the edges of things rather than the center of them. Watching from the position of a woman who understood that some of what was happening was hers, and some of it was her father's, and she had to know which was which. He looked at her for a moment. She said, "Dad, let them help." 3 words. Precisely the right 3. Nathan Harper looked at his sketches, at the gray folder with its soft edges, at 15 years of a plan he'd never thrown away. "All right," he said, and this time all right meant something entirely different than it had on Tuesday night. This time it meant the door wasn't just unlocked. This time it was open. The sketches changed everything. Not immediately, not in the dramatic overnight way that stories sometimes promised when they wanted to skip over the hard part. The change was slower than that and more real. The kind of change that happened the way a body healed from a long injury, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of mornings where something hurt a little less than it had the day before, until one day you realized you'd stopped measuring the pain. It started with a conversation between Nathan and Des that lasted 3 hours at the kitchen table. The sketches spread out between them, coffee going cold on both sides. Des had contacts in the custom motorcycle world. Real ones built over years of being in the right rooms at the right times, and he walked Nathan through what the market looked like now, what buyers were paying for quality handwork, what commissions moved at shows, and what sat. Nathan listened the way he listened to everything completely, without interrupting, filing information into the specific internal architecture of a man who had once been very good at turning ideas into operational realities and hadn't lost the wiring for it even after years of disuse. At the end of 3 hours, Nathan said, "The pricing model you're describing is wrong for what I do." Des looked at him. "I'm listening." "The market you're talking about is volume adjacent. Custom work sold at shows moving fast, priced to attract buyers who want the story of custom without paying the full price of it. That's not what I make." Nathan tapped one of the sketches, a full jacket panel with tooling so detailed it had taken him the better part of 4 months to complete. "What I make takes time. You price it by the hour and the material and the reputation behind it, or you price it wrong and you resent every piece that leaves the shop." Des was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay, walk me through your pricing model." Nathan walked him through it. By the end of that conversation, Des had made 2 more phone calls. Victor, who had been listening from the living room with the practiced attention of a man who understood that the best thing he could do in certain moments was stay out of them, appeared in the kitchen doorway when the call ended. "Well," he said. Des looked at him. "He's not going to be our leather guy." Victor raised an eyebrow. "He's going to be his own leather guy," Des said. "We're just going to tell people where to find him." Nathan looked up from the sketches. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face that was not quite belief, and not quite the absence of it, a man standing at the exact edge of allowing himself to want something again. Then he looked back down at the sketches and said practically, "I need a better light in the workshop. The one in there is garbage, and it's been costing me on the detail work." Cord said from somewhere in the hallway, "I'll order one." "I didn't ask you to." "I'm ordering one," Cord said. "What wattage?" A pause. 5,000 Kelvin, Nathan said. "Daylight spectrum." "Done." And just like that, the machine started moving. The roof was assessed on Monday. 2 sections needed immediate work. The rest could wait until spring. Victor paid for the immediate work without making a conversation out of it, which was how Victor handled most things directly, and without requiring gratitude, because in his understanding of the world, gratitude was something you earned through sustained action, not a single bill, and he wasn't ready to collect it yet. The back doctor, the name Cord had left on the step, was visited on Wednesday because Lily made the appointment and drove Nathan there herself and sat in the waiting room with her arms folded and a look on her face that communicated clearly that she was prepared to sit there as long as necessary. The doctor found what anyone who watched Nathan move could have told them: 2 compressed discs, chronic inflammation, the accumulated physical cost of years of physical work, followed by years of not enough movement to keep the damage from settling in. He was given a treatment plan and a referral to a physical therapist 2 towns over. On the drive home, Nathan sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window and said, "Your mother would have made this appointment 5 years ago." Lily kept her eyes on the road. "I know. I should have gone sooner." "Yes." "You're not going to say anything else?" "What else is there to say? You went. That's what matters." He looked at her. "You're not going to gloat." "I don't gloat." "You're thinking about it." "I'm thinking about how I'm going to tell Cord that he was right without making it weird." Nathan looked back out the window, a sound that was unambiguously a laugh, short, real, unself-conscious. The second time she'd heard it in a week after years of almost never. She stored it the way she stored everything that mattered. Quietly, completely. The physical therapy started 2 weeks later. Nathan went without complaint and came home in pain and went back the following week anyway, which the therapist told him was the only approach that worked and which Nathan told her he had already figured out. They liked each other from the start, which surprised Nathan, who had not expected to like anyone new. The workshop light arrived on a Thursday. Cord installed it that afternoon and that evening. Nathan stood in the back room under 5,000 Kelvin of daylight spectrum light and looked at his work table and at the tools arranged on it and at the piece he'd had half finished for 6 weeks, and he sat down and picked up where he'd left off. He worked for 4 hours without stopping. When he came out of the workshop, Des was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and the look of a man who had been waiting without wanting to admit he'd been waiting. Nathan sat down, took the cup. "It's better," Nathan said. "The light." "I know," Des said. The detail work on the tooling. I've been compensating for the bad light for years without realizing it, rushing the fine lines before the eye fatigue set in. He drank his coffee. I lost some quality I didn't know I was losing. Des said, "You'll get it back." I know I will. He said it without drama, without the self-consciousness that would have been there a month ago. Just as a fact, a true thing about himself that he was comfortable stating. Des noticed, didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. That was February. By April, 3 things had happened that none of them had specifically planned for, but that arrived with the inevitability of things that had always been coming. The first, Nathan's back under the consistent care of a woman who did not accept excuses as substitutes for compliance had improved enough that he was moving differently. The specific guardedness in the way he carried himself, the slight brace, the compensation pattern, the posture of a man pre-managing pain had started to release. He stood straighter. He moved with more of the ease that had been natural to him. Once before, the years of sitting and grieving and working hunched over a table in bad light had rearranged the architecture of how he occupied space. Victor noticed this first, said nothing about it for 2 weeks. Then one afternoon in April, he looked at Nathan across the kitchen table and said without preamble, "You look different." Nathan said, "My back is better." "It's more than that. Don't make it poetic, Victor." "I'm not making anything. I'm just saying you look different." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I sleep better. I've been sleeping better for about 3 weeks. I didn't realize how long I hadn't been sleeping correctly until I started doing it correctly." He paused. "It changes things. Sleeping correctly." "It does. My head is clearer. Things seem," he stopped, found the word, "possible. Things seem possible that didn't before." He looked at Victor. "I don't know what to do with that yet." "You don't have to do anything with it," Victor said. "You just have to let it be true." The second thing that happened in April, a member of the Iron Wolves named Ray Quietman, 60 years old, had ridden with the club for 23 years, called Victor from 2 states over and said he wasn't doing well. Victor listened on the phone for 40 minutes. The story was one he recognized in its architecture, even if the specific details were Ray's own: a loss, a long silence after it, a slow contraction around the empty space until the man couldn't remember the size he'd been before the contracting started. Victor sat at Nathan's kitchen table after the call and was quiet for a while. Nathan, who had been in the room and who had not been listening, but had also not been not listening, said, "Is he going to be okay?" "I don't know." "Who is he?" Victor told him about Ray. The outline of it, the 23 years and the loss and the 2-state distance and the phone call that had come out of nowhere because Ray had needed to tell someone, and Victor was the someone he trusted. Nathan listened. Then he said, "Give me his number." Victor looked at him. "Why Tipatisha?" "Because I want to call him." He said it plainly without performance. "I know what he's feeling. Not the specifics. Every version of that particular feeling is its own, but the shape of it. I know the shape of it very well." He met Victor's eyes. "And sometimes what you need is someone who knows the shape." Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he gave Nathan the number. Nathan called Ray that night. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Victor didn't know what was said. Nathan didn't tell him, and Victor didn't ask, because some conversations were their own and didn't need an audience, even in summary. But Ray drove to Nathan's house 3 weeks later, stayed for a weekend, left looking like a man who had been reminded of the size he'd been before he'd started contracting. That was how the third thing began. It didn't have a name yet, not a formal one. Victor would eventually call it a support structure, and Des would call it a network, and Eddie Rack, with characteristic imprecision, would call it the thing Nathan does. And all of these names were accurate, and all of them were smaller than what it actually was. What it actually was Nathan Harper, who had spent 15 years learning every topography of what it meant to lose yourself in grief and survive it badly, and survive it anyway, making himself available to other men who were somewhere inside that same landscape and couldn't find the way through alone. It started with Ray. Then Ray mentioned it to a man named Carl, and Carl called, and Nathan talked to Carl, and Carl came out to the house. Then a member from another chapter heard about it through Victor and called, and Nathan talked to him for 2 hours on a Tuesday night and followed up the next day without being asked to. He was not a counselor. He made no claims to be one. He was very clear about that, clear to the point of almost aggressive about it, and the clarity itself was part of what made people trust him. He wasn't offering answers or therapy or a program. He was offering the specific and non-transferable thing that only came from having actually been inside the darkest part of a particular kind of experience and come out the other side with your character intact. He knew what worked. He knew what didn't. And he knew from 58 years of being Nathan Harper how to listen without flinching and speak without softening things into uselessness. By June, Victor had a conversation with him about formalizing it, making it something the club could actually point to and support and grow. Nathan said, "I don't want it to become a program. It won't be a program because programs turn into bureaucracy and bureaucracy turns into something that serves itself instead of the people it's supposed to serve." Nathan, I know. Then what are you actually proposing? I'm proposing that we resource it, that we make sure you're not running this out of your own pocket in your own time with no support. That we build something around you, not above you, not managing you, just around you so you can do more of it. Nathan considered that. And the leather work, he asked. The leather work stays, Victor said. Non-negotiable. That's not separate from this, Nathan. That's part of it. You showing men that you built something real out of your own two hands in a room alone for 8 years, that is not incidental. That is the whole point. Nathan looked at him. You're not just telling men it gets better, Victor said. You're showing them what better actually looks like, in a concrete, visible way. That's different. He paused, and for Victor Malone, who weighed his words like a man who understood their cost, the pause was significant. That's something I've never seen anyone else do well, and I've been in this world a long time. Nathan was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. The third time he'd said those words since that Tuesday night in February, each time meaning something larger than the time before. The ride for Margaret happened in September. Nathan had not planned it. It had grown the way things grew when people who cared about an idea told other people who cared about ideas, from a quiet suggestion by Lily into something that had its own momentum before anyone had quite agreed to it. Margaret Rose Harper, 14 years married to a man who went to prison for other men and came home to watch her die and never stopped loving her through any of it. She deserved a ride. Lily said so first. Nathan didn't argue, which was itself a form of agreement. The morning of the ride, Nathan was in the workshop at 6 a.m. 6 a.m., not working, sitting in the chair he'd pulled in there months ago in the good light, with a cup of coffee, looking at the piece on the table, a custom tank cover. He'd nearly finished the most detailed work he'd done in years. A design he'd pulled from one of the original sketches and refined into something that was better than what he'd imagined at 35. Victor found him there. He stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything. Nathan said without turning, "I'm all right. I know you are. I just wanted to sit in here for a minute." Okay. She would have liked all of this. He didn't specify what this meant. He didn't need to. She always thought I was too much in my own head to let anyone help me. She told me that about 100 times. He paused. She was right. She was right about most things. Victor said, "She sounds like she was something. She was everything." The words came out, simple and direct, the way the truest things sometimes came when a man stopped trying to protect himself from them. She was everything I had when I had nothing else, and I didn't do right by her in a lot of ways, and I have made my peace with that the only way I know how, which is by trying to do right by the people who are still here. Victor was quiet. That's all any of us can do, Nathan said. Isn't it? Do right by the people who are still here. Yes, Victor said. That's all. Nathan stood up, put his coffee cup on the table beside the unfinished tank cover, straightened his jacket. How many bikes, he asked. 37 as of last count. More might have come in overnight. Nathan stopped. 37, he said. Word got out. Chapter members, people from the support network, a few guys who just heard what the ride was for and wanted to be part of it. Victor paused. Ray is here. Drove in last night. Nathan absorbed that. Something moved through him, not visible exactly, but present in the set of his face and the stillness of him for exactly 3 seconds before he nodded once. 37 bikes, he said again, as if he needed to hear it in his own voice to believe it. And counting. He walked out of the workshop. Lily was waiting in the driveway. She was wearing a jacket Nathan recognized. Dark green had been her mother's, fit her differently, but looked right on her in the way that things looked right when they were where they were supposed to be. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "You ready?" He walked to the bike, his bike, the black frame and the hand-welded eagle, and the years of Cord's YouTube tutorial maintenance, and the cold of the metal that was not cold anymore because September was warm and the morning sun had been on it for an hour. He put his hands on the handlebars, felt the grip, the specific geometry of it, how it fit his hands, how the bike sat under his weight. When he swung a leg over, how everything adjusted and settled, the way a thing settled when it recognized the person it belonged to. He sat on it for a moment. 37 bikes behind him, 37 engines not yet running. The whole driveway and the lane and the road beyond it, waiting in the specific silence that existed in the moment before everything became sound. Lily put on her helmet and got on the back of a bike behind him, Eddie's, because Eddie had asked 3 weeks ago and she'd said yes, because she'd liked the optimism of the ask. Des came up beside Nathan, looked at him. "You good," Des said. Nathan looked down the lane, at the road at the end of it, at the morning light sitting flat and golden on the asphalt, the way October light sat on the road in the dream, almost the same, not quite, but close enough to matter. "Yeah," Nathan said. He kicked the engine. It caught on the first try. Of course it did. 37 engines followed him into the morning like a sentence that had finally found its ending, rolling out of a driveway and onto a road and through a mountain town that looked up from its Tuesday morning routines to watch them pass. Watched a man who had been a ghost in a house at the end of a gravel lane come back through the middle of the world he'd been absent from with 37 people behind him who knew the weight of what it had taken to get here and had chosen to be part of carrying it. He didn't think about the prison. He didn't think about the years. He didn't think about the grief or the silence or the specific long cost of being Nathan Harper in all the ways it had cost. He thought about Margaret, about the way she had looked at him when he was 29 years old and full of himself, and she had seen something worth keeping in him anyway. About the way she'd said his name, his actual name, not the road name, just Nathan, in the particular tone that meant she knew exactly who he was and had decided to stay anyway. He thought I stayed too. He thought I'm still here. The road opened ahead of him when and real and full of the October light that was not quite the dream light, but was the actual light, the real thing, which had always been better than the dream because you could ride inside it. And Nathan Harper, 58 years old, 2 healed discs, and a back that still talked to him in bad weather, a workshop full of work that people wanted, and a phone that rang now with men who needed what he had to give. Nathan Harper rode. He did not ride because the past was behind him. He rode with the past beside him where it belonged, where everything that had shaped him and broken him and refused to let him finish beside him, not behind him, not ahead of him, just present the way the truest things were always present. He did not survive that Tuesday night in February at a diner called Patty's. He came back to life in it. And the road that had always been there waiting with the patience of something that understood the difference between a man who was gone and a man who was not yet returned, that road held him now steady and wide and completely without judgment. That road held all of them. Brotherhood was not what happened when everything was fine. Brotherhood was what happened when a man fell so far into the dark he forgot what the light felt like. And the people who should have come sooner finally came, and the man who had every right to turn them away opened his door instead. Because surviving alone was something Nathan Harper had proven he could do. But living had always required other people. And now on a September morning with 37 engines behind him, and his daughter riding a bike 2 rows back, and a road opening wide through the mountains he had always loved, now Nathan Harper was finally completely and without reservation living. That was the whole of the story, and it was enough.